É legal saber que nas embalagens dos alimentos que saboreamos em nossas casas, na conservação dos medicamentos e produtos de higiene, nos veículos que nos ajudam a ir e vir com segurança e nas casas e edifícios em que moramos e trabalhamos, o alumínio é essencial. Que a inovação em cada uma das etapas do processo de transformação do nosso alumínio é real. Que o orgulho de atuar de forma sustentável do início ao fim do processo é fundamental. E que a dedicação e a certeza em saber que estamos no caminho certo é natural. Afinal de contas, crescer fazendo o que acreditamos é primordial. É sustentável, é alumínio, é CBA.
Olá, muito bom dia. Seja muito
Hello,
bem-vindo.
good morning, and welcome to the CBA Dialogues. In this first edition, our topic will be ESG. I'm Sonia. I'm a journalist and SDG pioneer by the Global UN Compound and a member of the Sustainability Committee. I'm a white woman. I'm wearing white and black blazer, and I'm presenting this from a studio with high ceiling and lateral windows with a green garden. Behind me, we have a wall with concrete and big panels that illustrate what me and my guests will be speaking about. I'm really honored to be presenting this edition of the Dialogue CBA with a panorama of the actions and results that we've achieved in the environmental, social, and governance results, because results are fundamental. I want to let you know that for this transmission, our team will continue to follow all of the prevention protocols for COVID-19, guaranteeing everyone's safety. I still would like to remind you that this meeting is being organized in 2 languages, Portuguese and English. If you need translation, please select the option on the app. The CBA Dialogue is another channel for the company to provide transparency to its performance and operation. This is fundamental. And in this chapter, where we're going to be discussing the ESG practices, besides presenting results, we'll have time for discussing trends and opportunities that exist in the market. It's going to be definitely a very important dialogue. So this concern and this ESG perspective will guide and structure initiatives intending to improve the competitive advantages and value generation that are shared with investors, clients, suppliers, employees, and all of society to generate aluminum that is more and more sustainable, making this a permanent strategy for the business in the company and adding even more value to the solutions and products that are offered to the market. And as a member of the Sustainability Committee, I'm really proud to be part of CBA's journey, and I've been keeping up with this day to day, and I can prove the serious and credible actions that you'll get to know about in greater detail. So our schedule will include Ricardo Carvalho, our CEO. He'll be presenting some of the ESG highlights with a focus on governance processes and advances in CBA as we conquer important certifications in the sector. And this is really making sense, right? It's so important to do this, but it's also very important to have validation from the market and recognition about our credibility and seriousness. And then we'll have the Director of Human Development and Organizational Development for Health and Safety, Environment and Sustainability, Andres Salamana, and the General Manager for Sustainability, Leandro Faria, will talk about results and projects both in the social and environmental fronts in the company. After, at 10:30, we'll welcome some specialists in investments at CRU, Director Paul Robinson. He'll be talking about the worldwide market of commodities in 2022 with a special highlight for aluminum. Then soon after, we will also have a dialogue with executives at CBA and Paul Robinson talking about aluminum and the transformations and benefits that the ESG agenda will provide in all of its value chain. At this moment, we'll also have the participation of the CFO and Investor Relations Leader at CBA, Luciano Alves, and he'll be joining us here at the studio. For the Q&A, your participation is very important. So you'll be able to send your questions and comments by chat, and I'll be directing them to our guests. Now, I'm going to open up the CBA dialogues, and the pleasure to welcome our CEO, Mr. Ricardo Carvalho. He is one of the most inspiring leaders I've known with a very strategic, interesting vision. Ricardo, welcome. Thank you very much, Sonia. Thank you for the comments. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. I'm a man, I'm white, I'm heterosexual, cis. I'm 65 years old. I have 1.68 height. I use glasses. I have a beard and mustache, and my hairs were brown one day, but now they're white. So, as Sonia mentioned, I will be sharing a bit of our governance at CBA and especially focused on ESG. So in this first slide that you can see, we have our purpose and solutions for aluminum that transform lives. And surrounding our purpose, we have our main strategic pillars, which are growth, competitiveness, innovations, and partnerships. And one of the four pillars is really establishing a reference position in ESG, which demonstrates how ESG is really part of our strategy. It's one of our important pillars, and we really guide ourselves by these values and our culture. As you can see, the values of integrity, collaboration, courage, work, teamwork, ownership, and ambition and competitiveness. And our main desire, which is being result driven. So it needs to be, of course, sustainable. Issue once again comes in. Then at the center, you can see our partnerships and customers, and on the right side, you can see people. So these are things we're aspiring for the company. And moving on to our next slide, we have the 10 pillars we operate in. Maybe we jumped one slide, but we have 10 main axes for operation in our ESG strategy for 2030. Among these, just to give you an idea, we have climate change, we have people, and so on. So these 10 different axes that guide or are the basis of our strategy for 2030 can be split into 15 different programs, and these programs can be once again split into 31 targets for 2030. And I will invite all of you guys to access our report for CBA, where all of these targets are public and they are disclosed with their related actions. We have targets that are very well structured. On our next slide, among these 15 different programs that I mentioned, 4 of them will be approached more today by CBA's organization, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, value generation. Sorry, once again, we jumped one slide ahead. Decarbonization and biodiversity. So these 4 programs will be where we're going to be spending a lot more time covering details today. And about governance on our next slide, we of course have our board in the company with half of its members as independent members. We also have advisory committees. And among these committees, we have a sustainability committee, which advises the board in the company, and in the company's management, we have the Executive Sustainability Committee, which is a committee that I coordinate with members from our organization and some other members that are also CBA partners when it comes to sustainability. So we always try to compare ourselves with the world and be assessed about how we're doing to be able to know about the opportunities we have and so that we can always evolve. In the bottom part of this slide, you can see that we have an A rating in MSI. We are signatories of the Global Compact. We have a leadership rating in the CDP. We focus on the size-based targets. We also have the ASI certification, one of the most important. We have the custody chain guarantee. We're also part of CBA here in Brazil. So, anyways, we have been participating in many different events. Uh, I just as this one today, so that we can always be talking about this topic and sharing what we're doing, and also identifying new opportunities so that we can continue with our evolution. So, still about governance, ESG is really a topic that influences our variable compensation and for the executives at CBA. All of the work we've been doing at CBA has an impact. The ESG impact is considered. And I'm just giving you some examples of how ESG is really incorporated in our management and strategy and our business overall. So now I'll pass on the word once again to Sonia so that we can continue with this event. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ricardo. It's really good to hear about this coming from the company's CEO, and I want to highlight that everything you said was so rich, but the connection of ESG and strategy. I think that's what's going to set the scene and be really in line with the culture and values of the company, as well as all the structure you presented today with programs for governance, etc. Thank you so much, Ricardo. Well, unity, respect, ethics, and diversity. These are the basis of our interpersonal relations at CBA. The company develops a inclusive culture to be able to create a democratic, egalitarian environment. And CBA intends to offer more job positions to minority groups. This is a debate that is fundamental in our company, and that's why CBA has been performing adjustments in its platform. So as we talk about advances in CBA so that it can be a more diverse company, I'll invite Andressa Lamana. She's our development director for human and organizational aspects, health, safety, environment, and sustainability. Welcome, Andressa. Sonia, good morning. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ricardo, as well. It's a great pleasure to be with you guys. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a white woman. I have brown eyes and hair. I'm using a blue shirt and a black skirt. And as Ricardo mentioned, diversity is one of the programs that's basing our strategy at ESG at CBA. So we consider that diversity, equity, and inclusion are pathways for a fair and more equal environment that can favor innovation, competitiveness, and sustainability in our company. Ever since 2019, we have a program called CBA Mais Diversa, which has some initiatives that are basing the structure of this program that really made CBA reach a whole new level. We established the Committee for Diversity, and among this committee, we split into 4 different groups for racial aspects, gender equality, LGBTQ plus, and people with disabilities. Ever since we were able to raise and train over 400 leaders in the diversity topics, which represent some interesting numbers, especially when it comes to gender equality. And this is what I want to share with you. We had an important advance as we hired more women and some partnerships that were established. And I want to mention, for example, a partnership with Senai where we trained over 250 women to take on logistical or metalwork operations, and we hired almost 30% of this amount of people in our operation. And besides this, we're really concerned with the career of the women in our company. So we intend to reach 25% women up until 2025, occupying leadership position, and now we already have 19% women. On the next slide, I would like to also mention that we some shared value generation. So we are convicted of our responsibility with public authorities and the audiences and stakeholders we're in touch with. So as we talk about communities in the locations where we operate, we try to contribute with a legacy with everyone involved and all the stakeholders through a social strategy based on 3 pillars: development, education, supporting public management, and economic dynamics. These initiatives take place as a partnership with Institute Votorantim, and Ricardo is also a chairman of the board. Then these are in line with the SDGs. And then besides this about our suppliers as a leader in the sector. We understand our responsibility to influence our supply chain as a whole, and we have 3,000 suppliers that participate in this project. In 2020, we launched the Sustainable Supplies Program, led by Joseli Milagris, our supply chain director, which has the main ambition of being a reference in sustainability management in the supply chain. In line with this ESG 2030 strategy, we plan to increase purchases from local suppliers and have 100% of our suppliers adhering to our sustainable supplies policy. This is the general message. Sonia, it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much once again. Thank you, Andres. I normally say that diversity, besides being the right thing to do, also provides returns. It increases competitiveness, and you brought some important data, and you mentioned the SDGs as well. Thank you very much, Andressa. So CBA is completely committed to sustainability, guaranteeing the offer of low carbon aluminum and sustainable solutions, partnering with all stakeholders. Another very important agenda. CBA also works with the development of surrounding communities, positively influencing the entire aluminum chain. To understand all of this and to discuss some different projects for decarbonization and preservation of biodiversity, I would like to invite Leandro Faria. He's the General Manager for Sustainability. Welcome, Leandro. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Andressa, Ricardo. It's a great pleasure to be with you guys today. Hello, everyone. I'm Leandro, and I'm going to perform my audio description. I am a white man, have brown eyes, medium size, gray hair, have gray beard. I'm wearing a black suit and a white shirt. And as I mentioned, it's a great pleasure to be with you today. I will continue a bit of our CBA ESG dialogue with an important topic, which is management of emissions and decarbonization with the preservation and management of biodiversity. So we know exactly what the importance of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and the relevance that this brings to our business as well as to the overall world. And this is why this topic is very important and central to our ESG strategy. We are already producing low carbon aluminum. As you can see in this graph, in the electrolysis phase, our results are 2.56 tons of CO2 per ton of aluminum. This result positions us in the first quartile of the emission curve for aluminum production globally. So that means that we are one of the industries that produces aluminum with the lowest rate of carbon emissions. And why is it so relevant to talk about this electrolysis phase? Well, first of all, it's possible to have a reference or a benchmark, and also because this phase represents over 70% of the emissions in the full aluminum production, primary production chain. So another important, very relevant detail is why is this so significant for CBA? Well, because we have our energy matrix predominantly coming from clean sources. We have 21 hydropower plants that have the capacity to produce 100% of our electric power from clean and renewable sources. So although these results are relevant, and it's important to mention that CBA's aluminum can contribute to the decarbonization of our partners and also contribute to the decarbonization of the overall world. We know about the importance aluminum has in the energy transition, and especially when it comes to a transition to other sources of energy like electric power from solar panels and wind power, etc. So that's why CBA's aluminum has this important role in this pathway to reach decarbonization. Although our results are already very good, when we talk about sustainability at CBA, we know that there's no arrival line, and it's important to always challenge ourselves. So we have targets and objectives that are very ambitious. When it comes to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, our target is to reduce 40% of the emissions up until 2030. And this is not only considering the electrolysis phase, as I mentioned, but also the mining and steel work which include all of our targets for the reduction of 40%. So mining, refining of aluminum dioxide, the smelter work, and melting work as well. So as you can see, we're performing very well, and our objective is to reach 2.45 all the way to 2030, and we reduced already 25% of our 40 objectives. So it's important to mention that all of our inventories and data published follow a criteria for transparency and legitimacy with third-party auditors so that we can guarantee that we have this communication with the stakeholders and interested parties. We know exactly where we're headed and how we're going to do this. And it's important to mention also that CBA is the first and only company for primary aluminum that was able to reach its targets and have these approved in a science-based target or data with its methodology, which really makes CBA's journey legitimate as an important contribution to the control and also to fighting climate change. So, besides all of the issues regarding the reduction of intensity, as I just mentioned, we also have an important path with the offsetting of our carbon emissions up until 2050. So 40% of this is very clear, as I mentioned in the previous slide, when it comes to the intensity of the reduction of emissions. And here I'm bringing in a little more details about how we plan to reach this neutralization or offsetting process. The first driver is the use of scraps. We know that recycling aluminum consumes only about 5% of all of the energy for the production of aluminum following all of its conventional paths and steps. So that's why it's such a relevant driver in our strategy, and it's thus very important in our pathway for offsetting and reducing carbon emissions. So 75% of all the aluminum produced in the world is still used and available to be recycled. Aluminum is 100% recyclable and it won't lose its characteristics. And the next driver is related to our pathway for decarbonization, which is regarding the reviewing our energy matrix. So over the past years, we have been trying to improve our energy matrix even more. In the refining phase, we substituted oil coming from fossil sources, and we started using biomass in the production of vapor. We're one of the first industries that produces aluminum that has been using biomass in the refining phase. So this means a potential of 9%. This biomass boiler is already operating and has already delivered this percentage of reduction. Just in this refining phase, together with electrolysis, we already represent about 90% of the emissions in the primary aluminum, and we reduced 63% already. So we have aluminum dioxide with one of the lowest rates in the world. And besides this, we're also investing in innovation and upgrading our technology for the production of a liquid metal, which represents 6% in this offsetting journey. And within this smelter phase, we can reach almost 20%. So those numbers of 2.56 could reach 2.18 in the next years with the implementation and application of our technology for the smelters. So besides this, an important leverage is also related to the energy efficiency. We've been searching for an improvement of our energy efficiency, and this, along with those 40% we've already known of our journey as we perform the offsetting of our emissions, we're still missing about 40 or 50% that will be related to technologies that are still a challenge for the overall aluminum industry. Technologies such as capturing, using, and stocking carbon, and also some other in her anodes. And so we've already tried to, there have been many initiatives to make this technology feasible, but CBA is also working on this with the inner nodes, and we'll be using it as soon as it becomes feasible as well. So after we've overcome all these challenges and phases, we still have a percentage where we try to find the offsetting through carbon credits or offsetting our emissions through other projects that we've already begun. So for example, which projects are these? The first project is related to reforestation. This is a project with CBA called HIF Lada CBA. which intends to perform reforestation for areas with small rural producers that have some kind of an environmental deficit. So besides delivering shared value from an environmental perspective, it also delivers this value from a social perspective, as these small landowners will be able to have the officialization and regularization of their properties as soon as they have the reforestation complete. So we've begun this project this year. We have properties as well with reforestation underway, and we would like to scale this project up throughout the next years. Of course, this project, besides environmental gains and social gains, also intends to generate carbon credits that we'll be able to use to offset our own operation. And another important carbon credit project is related to the Red Plus methodology with the maintenance of the forest and preservation and conservation against deforestation. And this is a project that's been implemented in the Cerrado region in Brazil. This is an area that's important for sustainable development. It's a private area that belongs to CBA with about 11,000 hectares, and it'll be delivering in the next years about 300,000 carbon credits and 30,000 carbon credits annually in the next 25 years. So this is a very unique project, and it's the first project in the Cerrado region. Normally, you see Red Plus in the Amazon biome, but here we're innovating and creating conditions for other landowners to kind of follow this umbrella or follow the steps of our project and implement carbon credit generation and environmental services in their own properties. So all of this is only possible because we have this legacy of preservation and biodiversity and structuring initiatives. So we have two important areas where actually the founders, along with other entities that we invest in the Votorantim Group, with the legacy of waters and the green legacy of the Cerrado, two private sustainable development areas that add up to over 60,000 hectares. And also when it comes to mining and preservation and promotion of biodiversity, this is a fundamental part of our mining process. Besides, after this, we deliver the areas in same conditions or even better conditions to the same owners. And for this, we've prepared a small video that will demonstrate these legacies and how we perform mining using the best techniques when it comes to sustainability. I want to thank you all. And I'll stop here with my presentation and I'll call on this video, and soon I'll be back for the Q&A session. Thank you so much. At this moment, the video has subtitles, so we will stop the translation.
Parceria entre a universidade e a CBA viabilizou uma área experimental para a gente e uma área que está dentro da propriedade de um agricultor. Nós estamos desenhando várias técnicas para melhorar esse solo, devolvê-lo ao produtor rural, produzindo igual ele estava antes ou até melhor do que ele estava produzido antes de ser minerado.
Isso era uma pragazinha, um ramozinho. Hoje não, hoje você está sentindo que você está aqui numa área aqui, tem boi aqui, tem ali, tem lá embaixo, lá em cima tem, lá em casa está com uma porção. E graças a Deus você sente que tem capim sobrando aqui. Só me melhorou minha propriedade.
Que incrível, né? Sempre que eu vejo o
Wow,
trabalho.
that's so incredible. Whenever I see the work of the legacies, I get very excited with the strength and truth of this work. Thank you very much, Leandro. I wrote down one of his comments. There's no arrival point, and we need to be challenging ourselves more and more. We know where we want to get there and how we're going to reach this point. And through these two presentations with Leandro, considering all the decarbonization and protection of biodiversity, and also with what Andressa mentioned with diversity and valorization of the work environment, we see the importance of connecting these agendas to be able to really create an interconnected world for ESG and the role of the companies responsible so that we can advance more and more as we head towards our 2030 agenda. So I want to remind you all that you can also participate by sending your questions and comments on the chat during our Q&A moment. So now our next presentation will be in English. If you would like the translation into Portuguese, please select the button with the options for language, and you can listen to this in Portuguese. Now it's our time to greet our special guest. We're going to be connecting now with the CRU director, Paul Robinson, and he's going to speak directly from London. Paul is going to tell us about the government policies and how these have been influencing industry and the means to reach decarbonization of this production and also the growing demand for green aluminum. Welcome, Paul.
Obrigado, Sonia. Obrigado, Ricardo. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. On behalf of CRU and myself, I would also like to thank CBA for the opportunity today to contribute to this first CBA Dialogues event. Maybe if we could see the slides, please. Brilliant. So my name is Paul Robinson. I'm a director at CRU Group, and today I will share my thoughts on ESG challenges and opportunities for the aluminium sector. I'm a tall, middle-aged white Englishman. I have very little hair left. I am wearing a white shirt and a blue jacket. I started my career in the power sector in 1991 and then moved to metals in 2005. And I have to say, today I am more excited about the prospects for low carbon aluminium than I've ever been in my career. And my presentation will cover three important questions. What is the outlook for aluminium demand as a green energy transition metal? What does the global emission curve look like for primary aluminium smelting today? And what might be the future triggers for green aluminium premiums that would benefit companies like CBA? So just a little bit about CRU. I'm very lucky to work with 300 colleagues across the world who focus on analysis and consulting in metals, in mining, and in fertilizers. This includes a full-time team of 20 aluminium analysts, as well as a team of 8 sustainability experts. And it's their work I will be drawing on today and sharing their views. So I'd like to give them the credit for what comes next. Next slide, please. So let's start with aluminium demand. Aluminium has never had a demand problem. As the chart on the left-hand side shows, demand has been historically strong, and it's been consistently stronger than other commodities such as steel and copper. And that's because it has wide usage across multiple markets. And actually sectors like Chinese steel, in our opinion, demand has already peaked. And we expect copper demand to peak towards the end of this decade. But we expect aluminium demand to continue to grow strongly throughout this decade and beyond. And you can see that on the right-hand side. Now, it's 4 things driving that growth, and it's all linked to the green energy transition. CRU forecast that we will see strong demand growth in packaging, in consumer goods, in electrical, and in transportation sectors. And if I just give you an example of the strongest sector, CRU forecast that aluminium demand in transportation alone will grow by 60%, 60%, or 12 million tons by 2031. Next slide, please. And if anything, I think our forecast on the transport sector is conservative. So global new energy vehicle sales, they doubled in 2021, and they doubled to 6.7 million units. And that was despite the pandemic. And there was strong growth across the world, in China, in Europe, in South America, and also in North America. And I spoke to our team this week and got them to update their automotive forecast given the economic uncertainty. And they still expect new energy vehicle sales to increase to 10 million units this year and to hit 39 million units by 2031. And this chart's a really good example of why aluminium benefits, because you've got four main vehicle types here from left to right. You've got battery electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, hybrid electric vehicles, and internal combustion engine vehicles. Now, in the short term, we expect plug-in hybrid electric vehicles to dominate new energy vehicle sales in the Americas. And these contain 50% or 80 kilograms more aluminium than a normal, ICE vehicle today. And in China and Europe, we expect they're more urbanized, and therefore battery electric vehicles are leading sales. And yes, they have less aluminium intensity, but they still have 60 kilograms or 40% more aluminium than traditional combustion engines. And that's why we have that 12 million ton growth in aluminium transportation demand to 2031, linked to new energy vehicles, linked to this green transition. And that's why aluminium is a winner from a demand perspective. The question is how production meets that demand and how green is that production? So next slide, please. Now, aluminium supply has two challenges. There's a short-term challenge now, which is that the absolute cost of power in some parts of the world is very expensive, and there are some production problems. And as this chart shows, there is actually limited low carbon aluminium produced today. So this chart comes from CIU's proprietary emissions analysis tool. It is a bottom-up, smelter by smelter assessment of carbon emissions for Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. The data is calibrated to various schemes. So it's calibrated to the European Union emissions trading scheme. It's calibrated with the International Aluminum Institute methodologies. And it's part of a larger database of 3,000 assets across 10 commodities where we track emissions. Now, we define at CRU low carbon aluminium as aluminium produced, primary aluminium that is, produced using less than 4 tons of carbon, direct and indirect, per ton of aluminium. But actually, over 50% of aluminium smelting today is supplied by power from coal-fired generation. And a lot of that is based in China and in India. And if you look at the red line on this chart at the 75th percentile, total direct and indirect emissions are over 16 tons of carbon per ton of aluminium, 4 times our low carbon threshold. Now, the yellow line, that is largely Middle East smelters supplied by CCGT or gas power stations. And again, significantly cleaner, but emissions are still double the low carbon threshold. And low carbon aluminium is less than 1/3 of primary production today, or about 21 million tons, which again, 21 million tons sounds like a lot of aluminium, but if we've got 12 million tons growth coming from electric vehicles in the next 6 years alone, you could see scenarios where this gets used quite rapidly. And the blue box you can see there, I've highlighted CBA's aluminium smelter in blue, and it is a first quartile low carbon aluminium producer. And over time, I expect assets in this quartile, including CBA, to benefit from tighter carbon emission legislation and broader green premium support. So really the question is, how will that support be delivered? So if we go to the next slide, please. Thank you. In all growth scenarios, our aluminium industry has to reduce CO2 intensity. Scrap can play a role in that, but we must reduce intensity within primary aluminium as well to achieve net zero carbon ambitions. And that's because we've got demand growth. So this must be coordinated. It must be coordinated with government, industry, investors, and consumers. They must all want to achieve this. And if one leg fails, the whole project fails. Now, I was in Toronto last month at PDAC, and it was clear that right now, investors still don't know how to value low carbon assets. Governments are not providing clear regulatory frameworks to support their rapid decarbonisation goals. And therefore, producers are not yet investing at the rate that's needed to meet those targets. So actually, the most important stuff is that governments must move to policy certainty. They need to start creating more certainty around their medium-term policies to help industry decarbonise. And with those policies, the financial struggle sector can put mechanisms in place to reward low-intensity emitters like CBA, and investors can much more easily build low-carbon portfolios if that meets its risk appetite. So to me, that is the next important step, is that government certain policy certainty. So what those policies could look like, if we go to the next slide, please. So using our carbon abatement curve, we at CREW believe that carbon prices need to increase 3 to 4 times in developed economies to incentivize the investments needed in alternative low carbon technology at the scale needed to meet the net zero targets. The schemes also need to be structured to benefit low carbon producers now. And that is something that is being hotly debated in the European Union's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, discussions that are ongoing right now. As it stands, starting in 2026, importers to the EU will be required to purchase emissions allowances on direct emissions, so that excludes power stations. From 2026, that could be anything from a benchmark of about 1.4 tons of carbon equivalent per ton of aluminium. And that benchmark will decrease each year until it's zero in 2035. Now, on the left-hand side, if power emissions are excluded, actually the cost differential to importers is very small, and there's very little incentive to decarbonize. And I'm afraid there's very little upside in terms of a premium coming through for green aluminium in the aluminium price. However, if CBAM includes indirect emissions, power station emissions, and that is the latest position of the European Parliament as of last week to include them, then the cost differential between coal and low carbon aluminium imports to the European Union widens to $2,500 a ton. So that would be a premium that's the equivalent to the aluminium price today. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen. You know, in isolation, it would be uneconomic for the EU's downstream sector to survive. But if we're looking for direction of policy, the discussions going on between ministers, the Parliament, and the European Commission right now, they're a great guide to the pace and type of emissions that legislation we can expect in the near term, and therefore how companies in that fourth quartile may benefit. So if we go to the next slide, please. The other thing we should look at is a trigger point around consumers and traders and downstream activity. When we see a significant uptick in low carbon supply deals that start to lock out that 21 million tons, we should start to see green premiums established. We're seeing some activity today. We all know about Apple and BMW and Nespresso sort of securing some of those low carbon material, but more needs to be seen publicly before those green premiums pick up. We at CREW have built out 2 scenarios. We call them the light green and deep green scenarios. In our light green scenario, we assume that half of demand in the transportation, packaging, and consumer sectors will have to be supplied from low carbon by 2031. In our deep green scenario, it's 80% of demand. And under both of those scenarios, we then see low carbon deficits at the end of this decade. And those low carbon deficits, that is when we would expect to see real premiums. And more low carbon consumption deals signed, the more markets will begin to price that into their projections of deficits. So that's the second signal we're waiting for. So if we move to the my last but one slide, please. It's a very brief read through, but in conclusion, we firmly believe that aluminium demand is a winner from ESG green energy transition. And I use that 12 million ton growth in electric vehicle transition alone as one example. But because of demand is growing, aluminium emission reductions have to come from a fall in CO2 intensity in our industry. CBA is already very well positioned because it is a low carbon producer already, and the initiatives that have been discussed in terms of improving that footprint even further and expanding that footprint through scrap and through biofuel only help to strengthen that position. The CBAM example in the EU highlights how the changing cost of carbon emissions may further advantage CBA. And again, really keep an eye on those negotiations ongoing between the European Union Parliament, the ministers and the council, because nobody knows where they're going to end up this summer. And then finally, I firmly believe green premiums are coming. It could take a little bit of time yet. We need to see those low carbon aluminium deficits being predicted by traders, and that becomes the precursor, if you like, for those premiums coming. Final slide, please. Thank you very much for your time today. I hope you found this informative. I very much look forward to joining the panel for questions now. And, after the event, feel free also to contact myself or my Brazilian colleague, Ricardo. Thank you very much, and I'll hand back.
Muito obrigada, Paul. Sem dúvida, o seu conteúdo técnico,
Thank you very much, Paul. No doubt your content has brought in an important dimension to us and to this conversation. I'd ask you to continue connected so that we can begin our Q&A. We're back here with Ricardo, Leandro, and Andressa, and now also with the CFO for Investor Relations at CBA, Luciano Alves. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you guys once again. Well, sustainability is a very important global strategic energy agenda that's unavoidable and cannot be postponed. So the ESG agenda is a path that has really become the rule of priority in countries and companies like CBA. So for us to be able to advance a bit more in this agenda and know how aluminum can contribute to the ESG agenda, we're going to start off with our Q&A session. Well, great. And I already have some questions coming in, of course, and I'll start off with the first one that's for Leandro and Luciano that came from the audience. We'd like to know about the project for carbon credits. The regulated Brazilian market is still not structured. So the idea is to already start in the volunteer market, or do you want to be ready for when the regulated market actually gets into action? And beyond this, how do you consider taxation for CBA products that are exported to regulated markets like the European market? Is this concerned with carbon credits already the anticipation of possible extra fees or rates in these markets? We'll start off with you, Leandro, and then we'll come to Luciano. Well, thank you for that question. I think that the first point is that the Brazilian market needs to take on some important steps to be able to structure the regulated market, and we have been doing this. This is very significant because Brazil has such big potential, and at CBA we're working on the carbon credit generation projects to be able to make them steering. So the carbon credit generation, one of its main objectives, as we can say, will be important for credits and for deduction of our own emissions. As I mentioned here, we want to follow a neutralization or offsetting pathway, and these credits will be very useful and very important in this path. But of course, the voluntary market is an option, and of course, we could access it just as when the regulated market is also implemented. But this is a project that besides environmental gains, there's also the social gains, and this gives us a very good condition to manage the best disposal or destination at the moment where the credits are generated in the Hiflata project, or for some of the first hectares that we're going to be reforesting. We plan to generate about 108,000 carbon credits for this set of land that I've mentioned in this pilot project. But for the Red Plus project, in the first 5 years, we'll deliver over 300,000 carbon credits, and then from the next years, 30,000 credits per year in the next 25 years. So we have very good conditions available, and we've been operating in a very preventive way. We've always done this, and that's why we have this kind of flexibility with all of these projects. Now, from the perspective of taxation or fees and even access to our aluminum to markets that have rates and fees like the European market, I think we have good advantages. Yes, I agree. When you consider fees or taxation for carbon in the future, Paul even mentioned this. It's natural that CBA would have this kind of taxation, but as we are a low carbon producer in the first quartile, we certainly will have an important advantage compared to other players. So in practical terms, if this taxation does exist in certain markets, CBA could be a supplier that has advantages. And that's pretty much how we've been visualizing this trend. But of course, this is not something short term. There's still some development that needs to be done in these markets, especially in how this will take place. But certainly, it is something that we're expecting for the mid to long term. Great. So since we're talking about carbon markets, I will now ask you a question, Paul. Paul, the question is, do you see any possibility for a premium in low carbon aluminum in the short term?
So in the short term, I don't think the premium is going to come out in prices. We are actually about to launch a consultation with the aluminium industry in terms of the need and readiness for an aluminium green premium today. There are advantages to having low carbon aluminium today. So there are advantages in terms of low cost funding for holding low carbon aluminium on warrant. And clearly there are consumer facing brands that are already willing to take, take preferential on low carbon aluminium. So there are markets and consumer brands that are taking advantage. But in terms of a significant premium that makes a significant difference to free cash flow at this moment, it's something that I'm hopeful towards the end of this decade. But again, we need to see more public locking up of that low carbon aluminium before it translates itself into a tradable price.
Muito bom, muito obrigada, Paul.
Great, Paul, that's excellent. And I think we had a great vision on carbon now. And now the question is for you, Ricardo. You just joined us here as well. And I really like this question because it gets into the topic of the stakeholders. And the question is, what do clients most demand when it comes to ESG changes at CBA? And have you been able to transfer these changes to suppliers?
Obrigado pela pergunta. Bom,
Thank you for that question. One of the ways that's so important for us to be able to influence the market when it comes to ESG is a program for sustainability where we're going to be including the supply chain related to the objectives for ESG with promoting ESG evolution, collaboration, and our partners so this can happen. And also a really good way for us to influence the supply chain for aluminum. And just as our customers also would be searching for possible partnerships as well. So that within our desirable targets and objectives in regards to ESG, we would like to really work on the entire supply chain with different partners so that we can really see this in the important in the changes that we would like to happen. Well, we did miss a bit of your connection at certain moments, but we were able to get the main message, especially when it comes to the importance of the partnerships as with CBA. That's fundamental. We won't be able to advance in this agenda individually, and CBA works together very well. I have another question for Paul, our guest from that's in London. Paul, could you give us a bit of your vision on the environment for the supply of aluminum? Does CRU believe we'll have persistent restrictions for the supply of primary aluminum in the next years? Do you think China will disrespect the self-imposed target of 45 MTPA for clean energy or even dirty energy?
Gosh, okay, some big questions there. So if I'm listening properly, over the medium term, even with the economic downside at the moment, we still see the primary aluminium market as being in deficit or pretty much in balance. There's an assumption in there that we will see the Chinese market recovering in the second half of this year, particularly after President Xi Jinping is reaffirmed as for his third term as president, and some of the incentives that we've seen to boost economic growth in China start to have a positive impact on demand. So balanced to maybe small deficit markets in the next 1 to 2 years. In terms of disrespecting targets for China, I think you have to look at China in a different lens. China is quite flexible with short-term tactics whilst maintaining long-term policies. So its long-term goal to decarbonize and to reduce, for example, power production from coal-fired generation, that's absolutely locked in and is required to keep the middle classes happy. But if they have economic difficulties in the short term, they are very happy to return coal-fired power station or to increase exports or to do whatever is necessary to maintain that economic growth. So if there are challenges in the Chinese economy in the short term, we should absolutely expect to see some sort of stimulus that may well not be entirely green, but I wouldn't say that moves them away from their medium-term decarbonization, decoal strategy. It's just a tactic to maintain that economic growth in the short term. I hope that answers the question.
Sem dúvida, uma grande pergunta. Isso que
No doubt, it's a big question, and that's great because we have a session that's very dynamic. But I have another question now that I would like to hear Ricardo's position as a CEO and also your vision, Andressa, considering the content of the question, which is the following: ESG is connected to the variable compensation or bonuses of the executives and employees? We could have more of a strategic vision from Ricardo, and then Andressa could get into the day-to-day of this process. Thank you for that question, Sonia. And yes, variable compensation for the executives at CBA has an important part related to ESG. There's an important process that's in line with our targets for 2030, and they influence variable compensation for executives. Thank you, Ricardo. That's it. We have about 10% of all of the variable compensation from many levels of the organization so that they can participate in a measurable and very precise manner of this journey for ESG. And we even considered this before the 3 little ESG letters were trendy. For many, many years, CBA has been concerned with environmental issues, people, diversity, and compliance. This has always been part of our variable compensation because we really believe that this is a very important way of measuring these results and reaching other levels of governance as well. Well, I think this is fundamental, and I normally say that this issue of including ESG in variable compensation is really the walk the talk. So if we're saying this is important, how do we see this reflected in a mechanism that is so important, such as variable compensation? Very, very good. Leandro, the floor is yours. Now, does the company plan to reach important indexes for sustainability, such as ESG? Well, thank you for that question, Sonia. and whoever else sent the question. Over the presentation, Ricardo mentioned we're going to be challenging ourselves to find technologies and methodologies and also ratings and references so that our management can evolve, so that we can assess ourselves, of course, and how we're positioned, and also so that our own management can be better and evolve. So this is how we're looking at all these ratings, and EASY is one of these. This year, we're really preparing ourselves to be able to participate in EASY. As soon as the process is initiated, we'll be submitting this to our management and following the EASY criteria. And we hope to learn with the best practices as well for governance when it comes to ESG aspects in our organization. Well, and then you took a look at Luciano, so I'm going to continue here because some of these indexes are really one of the guiding instruments when it comes to the perspective of the company improving practices and advancing, and investors also really value this. So tell us a bit of how you're looking at these instruments as market instruments as well. And of course, if you could add on to Leandro's vision about CBA. This is the main objective, which is the evolution. And through this certification, you really become, you understand where you're doing well and the main points and which indexes you need to improve in. So this improves the company's management and the company can work on the points where it's more relevant. But besides all of this, it's also an important way for you to equalize how you're looking at the company. So when you have many companies inside the same index, you can understand those companies from that perspective when it comes to easing from a sustainability perspective. And you can then look at them in a standardized way and really understand this. So we have many different certifications that were presented over time, but I think that this is a trend for us, and we're always going to be searching for ways to continue with these certifications and always evolve in this topic as well. Great. So just to take advantage of many different speeches here, and you mentioned this a lot, Leandro, about the pioneer approach that CBA has and how you've really developed initiatives with and even some of the targets approved as one of the first companies with primary aluminum production in the world. Ask you about the importance of innovation, uh, including many different challenges for decarbonization and all of the challenges for um, changing the climate in a more macro perspective. But how are you looking at the role of innovation in this? I'll ask Leandro and Paul to contribute here as well. And of course, if you want to go deeper in any other points, and if I'll start off with you, Leandro, and then after I'll move on to Paul. Well, thank you, Sania. And this protagonism or leadership that we're searching for is really to test the new methodologies and have this methodological basis in the ratings and science-based targets. And as you mentioned, these methodology that demonstrate we're on the right path also bring challenges. And innovation is fundamental, especially when it comes to decarbonization. So, as I mentioned, we already know about this for the decarbonization of almost 40% of our supply chain, and if we consider mining all the way to the smelting. And so what this means is that for us, scope 1 and 2, but for industry, aluminum industry that are not verticalized like us, we also consider this. But innovation is fundamental in this overall pathway to search for this new carbon neutral position. It's a challenge for industry and the aluminum industry as well to search for this neutrality, because technologies like inert anode technologies that have been studied for many years seem to be reaching close to commercial feasibility, and CBA has been keeping up with this and monitoring this, and we're really keeping our eyes open to these technological innovations. Just as capturing, stocking, and using carbon, we've also been contacting universities and researchers uh, that are bringing in technology and solutions. And of course, we will be testing all of the ones that seem to be feasible to us so that we can as soon as possible have this neutralization process for this fraction that really depends on clear technological advances. So Paul, innovation in this agenda, what could you talk about when it comes to this topic and what's the role of innovation in this agenda?
So for me, it's quite simple. We cannot hit the net zero targets that governments have set without innovation. It is impossible. So it is absolutely central to the world's challenge of decarbonisation. And maybe just to echo Leonardo and then put another point in there, from technical innovation, we need to try everything. We need to try blue hydrogen, we need to try green hydrogen, we need to try big step change innovation to capture carbon, but we also mustn't forget all of those small steps that each process, if we can take 1% energy efficiency, 1% less waste across that process, all of that adds up to huge gains for society. I think the other area which I'm really encouraged by with Luciano is, again, we need innovation on how we measure, track, and report on these things, because we don't know what consumers are going to be enthralled by yet, and we don't know what investors are going to like. So bringing out these indexes, pushing, being very transparent, and finding out how the best way of communicating these financial innovations and technical innovations to consumers, that becomes as important as the technical engineering innovations themselves. So without this, we will fail. It's absolutely central to everybody's strategy, and it's absolutely central to decarbonisation net zero targets.
É isso, né? Absolutamente essencial. Eu vou continuar com essa duplinha aqui.
That's it. So I'm going to continue here with Paul and Leandro, but now we have another question coming from our audience, and then Leandro can complement. So Paul, could you talk about a little more of the carbon net zero or initiatives in the primary aluminum production around the world? And what is the main challenge of this new methodology? So how is CBA participating in this development?
So there are three major developments. So the major development on primary aluminium is how to reduce inert anode, or how to introduce inert anode technology, and also how to decarbonize or increase the power efficiency of power sources going into aluminium. Some of this is going to have a direct impact. So moving aluminium smelters in China to the Hunan region, which is hydro-based, will help to lower the carbon footprint of another chunk of aluminium in the world. Some of it will...
Alô, oi. Pode continuar, Paul, por favor.
Sorry, Paul, you can continue.
Sorry, I thought I was... And then part of it, as I say, is inert anode technology. The other part is, of course, the importance of scrap. So the low power ratios within scrap are very important to reducing the overall carbon footprint. And the more that we can recycle, the more that we can reduce that primary aluminum production, and we can maintain that demand growth. So I'd say, well, the primary sector, it's scrap. It is it's the repowering to renewable-based technology where we can, and it is that continual innovation in energy efficiency throughout the chain.
Excellent. Paul's already mentioned a lot about the challenges when it comes to inert anodes and also the decarbonization of the energy matrix and recycling. But you can see that CBA is super well positioned, and we are searching for important advances in the recycling agenda. So this is part of our strategy with some recent acquisitions and an increase in capacity at Metalex. And so this agenda is addressed. Now, the decarbonization of the energy matrix is, for us, a mega advantage point from a competitive perspective, because we have our own hydropower plants, and we're growing with our wind power plants as well. And we also plan to work with solar power plants. So this leverage is also really well addressed. The now inert anodes, which is another important lever. For decades, this has been studied in the aluminum industry, and we are keeping up with these studies. So it seems to us that these studies will become public and feasible commercially in the next few years. So we're keeping our eyes open, and as soon as this becomes a possible opportunity from an economic feasibility perspective, we're going to use it. And other opportunities for capturing, using, and stocking up on carbon. We have some partnerships already with universities and companies in the tech front for the development of this important lever as well for offsetting carbon emissions. And we're going to continue to test this. Just as Paul also mentioned, we need to test this in small and large scales, and then, of course, implement them through innovation. And another very important point is partnerships. We're definitely going to grow a lot and go a lot further if we have good partnerships. So that's an invitation to our partners and investors and suppliers when it comes to this agenda, because we consider partnerships to be fundamental. The issue with climate change is not located, it's a global problem, and global problems require global and connected solutions. Yes, that's it for sure. I really like a phrase which says we can't have solutions from the 20th century for the 21st century. And I think that's what we're doing. We're searching for new solutions, and that's excellent. So, Ricardo, we have an audience that's super participative, and they want to hear a bit more from you when it comes the previous question you answered about what customers are demanding from CBA when it comes to ESG and which changes the clients are demanding. The audience asks you to go into a little more details about this. And I think this could be interesting, Ricardo, if you could bring maybe some of your own personal experiences, something that really called your attention that CBA has received as a demand from customers or suppliers when it comes to the ESG agenda. Of course, Sonia, thank you for going back to this question. I had an issue with my connection and I lost a bit of your question the first time, so I wasn't able to respond completely. But thank you for going back to this point. When it comes to customers, we have many positive feedback from our customers. So they really value the fact that we are low carbon producers and that we supply low carbon emission aluminum. And this still doesn't bring into premium price advantages from an economic perspective, but it brings in some important preference advantages. Paul also mentioned this a lot. Today, we have enough aluminum to supply customers that already value low carbon aluminum. However, we'll reach a point in time where if the aluminum industry does not evolve quickly, you'll start having a bit of a deficit in low carbon aluminum. So some of our customers, actually just last week, one of our customers contacted us and mentioned us at an event that happened, and they mentioned our carbon footprint and the aluminum they use. So this already demonstrates clearly the importance that has been given to a low carbon aluminum. And another thing, we've also, as I mentioned a bit in the beginning, in my first answer, when we have our sustainable supply program, and we also search for partnerships with customers in ESG, but we've received a few visits and requests also to share more of what we're doing when it comes to ESG. And for us, that's excellent as well. So to summarize this, there is not a specific demand yet for low carbon aluminum, but there is a strong preference already and the value of this in the market. So it's just a matter of time until this can actually generate other competitive advantages for low carbon aluminum. Great. Thank you so much, Ricardo. It's great to get back to you. Now we heard everything you said very well. And now we're reaching the end, unfortunately. I think we had a lot more to talk about, of course, but I will ask each of you to share a final message, maybe just one phrase or a final closing remark based on all of our discussions and debates. So I'll start off with our foreign guest, Paul, and then we'll continue and reach Ricardo at the end. So Paul, just a final phrase or message.
So final message, we can succeed as a society with decarbonisation, but it needs that partnership. It needs consumers, investors, and governments and producers working together. But we have a great stock of human innovation, and we will succeed if we work as a team.
Muito bom. O Paul trouxe a mensagem.
Paul brought the same message really I was going to share. But anyways, really reaching the objectives of this decade, which are fundamental, is definitely going to be based on our work together. I think on our own, we can move quickly, make quick decisions, but standing together will go a lot further. So it's a real strong invitation for important partnerships. We're really in line, Paul and Leandro, because we normally have a phrase here at CBA that's like, it only makes sense if we're all moving together. So with everyone's help and the help of our investors, our stakeholders, our clients, our suppliers, our employees, etc. Everyone here has the same objective, and we will no doubt overcome our operations every day in this important ESG topic. If I could add on to this, I'd just say that this is an agenda. The ESG agenda must not be restricted to this. It needs to be part of the DNA and strategy of the companies. And in CBA, historically, has always been an important point for us. And this brings a lot of competitiveness for our asset and long-term sustainability. So if we want an asset that can remain in the long term, it needs to be really considering this topic in a very serious approach as we do. So, Ricardo, well, first of all, thank you all for participating today. It's always a great pleasure for us at CBA to share everything we do when it comes to ESG, as we search for partnerships, as we search for improving all the time. And this is why we have this invitation to all of our partners. We're open to discuss ESG and what we can do together, because the change we need is going to definitely require collaboration, teamwork, and everyone standing together on the same direction so that we can implement the changes. So thank you very much, everyone. Great, guys. We didn't agree upon this closing, but work together, working jointly. Andressa just mentioned it only makes sense if we work together. Luciano also. And finally, Ricardo, the CEO, inviting everyone to join as stakeholders at CBA to also help build together. So it's wonderful. SDG 17, which is partnerships and implementing. So I think that's the final message. And with this, we'll reach the end of our CBA dialogue with focus on ESG. I learned so much today. I want to thank you all for your generosity and all of the main messages. Initiatives like this are part of CBA's governance and its commitment to transparency. Thank you so much, everyone, and especially you, as you've watched this event online and also participated and interacted and really made these dialogues even more interesting. So if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can access the CBA IR website and the official communication channels on LinkedIn and Instagram. And I want to also invite you all to get to know the ESG portal and the annual CBA report that you can access through this QR code on the screen that appears directly through CBA's website. I want to thank you all for your participation. I hope you all have an excellent day. Thank you very much.